London, 1925. A telegraph operator lies dead in a locked booth. A cryptic message, "Shadow falls at midnight," etched beside his scorched hand. Was it an accident or murder? Hercule Poirot, the master detective, unravels a web of espionage, betrayal, and hidden loyalties. A nervous colleague, a guarded linguist, a gruff technician, each hides secrets tied to a shadowy spy ring. As coded messages and wartime ghosts surface, Poirot races against time to expose a killer before the shadow falls again. Can he solve the puzzle of the locked booth and stop a traitor's deadly game? Chapter 1. The Locked Booth. The November fog hung heavy over London, cloaking the city in a damp gray shroud that seeped into the bones. In his impeccably ordered flat at Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat by the fire, his small, precise hands cradling a steaming cup of tisane, the aroma of chamomile and lemon curled upward, a delicate counterpoint to the chill beyond the windows. His eyes, sharp and green as a cat's, were half closed in contemplation when a sharp rap at the door shattered the evening's tranquility. "Entrez," Poirot called, setting the cup down with care. The door swung open to reveal Inspector Japp, his overcoat damp and his face etched with urgency. His usual bluff cheer was absent, replaced by a furrowed brow that spoke of trouble. "Poirot, I'm in a fix," Japp said without preamble, shaking droplets from his hat. "We've a queer case at the Central Telegraph office. A man's dead. Telegraph operator, name of Thomas Reed. Found in a locked booth, no way in or out, and a cryptic message on the machine. The yard's stumped, and I thought of you." Poirot's mustache quivered, a sure sign of piqued interest. "A locked room, mon ami? And a message? This is not a common affair. Tell me more." Japp sank into an armchair, its cushions sighing under his weight. "It's a rum business." Reed was found this evening slumped over his telegraph key, door locked from the inside, windows bolted, no sign of a struggle. Just the man, dead as a doornail, and a slip of paper with the words "Shadow falls at midnight" tapped out. The coroner's looking at him now, but there's a mark on his hand. Looks like a burn. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A burn, you say?" "Most curious. And this message, precisely what does it signify?" "That's the devil of it," Japp replied, rubbing his chin. "Could be a code, a warning, or pure nonsense. The office handles sensitive cables, government stuff, some of it." "We can't rule out foul play." Poirot rose, his movements brisk despite the hour. "Then we must to the scene, Inspector. The little gray cells, they are already stirring." "Hastings," he called toward the adjacent room, where his friend Captain Hastings was no doubt reading the evening paper. "We have work." The Central Telegraph office, a hulking edifice of red brick on Newgate Street, loomed through the fog like a sentinel. Inside, the air hummed with the faint clatter of telegraph machines, though the usual bustle had given way to an uneasy quiet. Policemen stood guard, their boots scuffing the polished floor, while clerks whispered in corners, casting nervous glances toward a glass-walled booth at the far end of the hall. Poirot, clad in a heavy overcoat and his favorite patent leather shoes, stepped lightly toward the booth, his cane tapping a steady rhythm. Japp followed, gesturing to the sealed cubicle. "There it is. Locked tight when we found him. The key was in Reed's pocket." The booth was a small utilitarian space, its glass panels revealing a stark interior. A wooden chair, a narrow desk, and the telegraph apparatus, its brass key glinting under the electric light. Thomas Reed, A man of perhaps 40 with thinning hair and a pinched expression lay slumped forward, his head resting on the desk as if in sleep. His right hand, outstretched toward the telegraph key, bore a small, angry red mark like a burn from a hot coal. Poirot leaned closer, his eyes darting over every detail. The telegraph machine was silent now, its wires neatly coiled, but the slip of paper beside it drew his attention. Inked in precise letters were the words, "Shadow falls at midnight." He touched the paper lightly, his gloved fingers tracing the edge. "This message, Inspector, was it sent or received?" Japp shrugged. "We don't know yet. The log shows no record of it being transmitted, but Reed was alone from 6 o'clock onward. The night supervisor found him at 8:30. Poirot's gaze swept the booth again. The lock on the door was a simple but sturdy affair. Its bolt slid firmly into place. The windows, high and narrow, were clamped shut, their latches rusted from disuse. A single electric bulb hung overhead, casting harsh shadows. He noted the faint odor of ozone, sharp and metallic, and a tiny scorch mark on the desk near the telegraph key, barely visible against the wood's grain. "Electrocution, perhaps," Poirot murmured almost to himself. "The burn, the smell, it suggests a current, non?" Japp nodded. "The coroner's checking for that. But how could it happen? The wiring's all in order, or so the technician says, and why lock the door?" Poirot straightened, his expression inscrutable. "The how, mon ami, is a matter of mechanics. The why, that is a matter of the human heart. We must learn who this Thomas Reed was and who wished him silent." He turned to Japp, his voice crisp. "Introduce me to those who were here tonight. Every man, every woman, they hold a piece of this puzzle." Japp led him to a small office where 3 figures waited, each marked by the strain of the evening. Arthur Crane, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and darting eyes, was Reed's fellow operator. Elena Voss, a tall woman with a guarded air and a faint foreign accent, served as a linguist for international cables. George Hammond, broad-shouldered and taciturn, was the technician responsible for the office's machinery. Poirot studied them, his mind already sorting motives and means. "Messieurs, mademoiselle," he said, his voice soft but commanding. "A man is dead, and the truth lies hidden. But Hercule Poirot, he will find it. Now let us begin." Chapter 2. The 3 suspects. The fog outside the Central Telegraph office thickened, curling around the gas lamps like a living thing, as Hercule Poirot stood in the dimly lit corridor, his keen eyes assessing the 3 figures before him. The air was heavy with the scent of ink and wax, mingled with the faint, acrid tang of electrical wiring that lingered from the scene in the locked booth. Inspector Japp, shifting uncomfortably beside him, gestured toward the small office where the suspects waited, their faces etched with varying degrees of unease. Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a subtle sign of the machinery of his mind whirring into motion. A man was dead, a cryptic message left behind, and the truth he knew lay buried in the words and silences of those who had been near Thomas Reed that fateful evening. "These 3," Japp said, his voice low, "were in the building when Reed was found. Arthur Crane, another telegraph operator, Elena Voss, a linguist who handles foreign cables, and George Hammond, the technician who keeps the machines running. Each claims they saw nothing, heard nothing. But one of them, or more, knows something, I'd wager." Poirot nodded, his gaze lingering on the closed door of the office. "The human heart, mon ami, It betrays itself in the smallest gestures. Let us observe, let us listen, and the truth will begin to emerge. Introduce me, if you please. Jap pushed open the door, revealing a cramped room with a single window fogged by the night's chill. A wooden table, scarred from years of use, stood at the center, surrounded by 3 chairs, each occupied by one of the suspects. The electric light overhead flickered faintly, casting shadows that danced across their faces. Poirot stepped forward, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the linoleum floor, his cane held lightly in one gloved hand. He surveyed the trio with the air of a conductor about to lead a symphony, his green eyes sharp and unyielding. Monsieur Crane, Mademoiselle Voss, Monsieur Hammond, he began, his voice smooth yet carrying an edge of authority. I am Hercule Poirot, and I am here to uncover the truth behind the death of Thomas Reed. A man does not die in a locked booth, leaving a message such as "Shadow falls at midnight," without reason. You were here. You may have seen, heard, or known something vital. Speak freely, for the truth cannot hide from Poirot. The first to speak was Arthur Crane, a wiry man in his early 30s whose pale face was framed by a mop of unruly brown hair. His fingers, stained with ink from hours at the telegraph key, fidgeted with the cuff of his worn jacket. He sat hunched, as if trying to make himself smaller, his eyes darting between Poirot and Jap. I don't know anything, he said, his voice high and strained. I was at my own station 2 booths down all evening. I heard nothing unusual, just the usual chatter of the machines. Reed kept to himself, always did. Worked late, secretive sort. I only noticed something was wrong when the night supervisor shouted for help. Poirot tilted his head, studying Crane's nervous movements. Secretive, you say? In what way, Monsieur Crane? Crane hesitated, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. Well, he'd stay after hours, tapping away when most of us had gone home. Kept his booth curtain drawn, didn't like being watched. Yesterday I saw him arguing with Miss Voss. He stopped abruptly, his eyes flicking toward the woman across the table as if regretting his words. Poirot's gaze followed, settling on Elena Voss. She was a striking figure, tall and composed, with dark hair pinned neatly beneath a modest hat. Her gray eyes met Poirot's without flinching, though there was a guarded quality to her expression, like a chess player anticipating an opponent's move. Her hands, folded calmly in her lap, bore no trace of nervousness, but Poirot noted the slight tightness at the corners of her mouth. Mademoiselle Voss, he said, his tone courteous but probing. An argument with Monsieur Reed. Perhaps you can enlighten us. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and measured, tinged with an accent that Poirot placed as Eastern European, perhaps Latvian or Estonian. It was nothing, Monsieur Poirot. A disagreement over scheduling. Thomas requested an extra shift which clashed with my own hours. I handle translations for international cables and my work requires precision. We exchanged words, but it was resolved. I assure you it was a trifle. Poirot's smile was faint, almost imperceptible. A trifle, mademoiselle? Yet Monsieur Crane recalls it vividly. Tell me, what was Monsieur Reed like as a colleague? Elena's eyes flickered, but her composure held. Professional, reserved. He did his work well, though he spoke little of himself. I had no reason to think ill of him. Poirot nodded, filing away her words for later scrutiny. He turned to the third suspect, George Hammond, A burly man in his late 40s with a weathered face and hands calloused from years of handling tools. His overalls were faintly smudged with grease, and his expression was one of barely concealed impatience. "And you, Monsieur Hammond? You were here maintaining the machinery, non?" Hammond crossed his arms, his jaw set. I was. Fixed a loose wire near Reed's booth that afternoon. Everything was in order when I left at 6. I was in the basement checking the main lines when they found him. Didn't hear a thing. Didn't see a thing. Poirot's eyes lingered on Hammond's hands, noting the faint scars and the strength in them. "A loose wire, you say? Near the booth where a man died, perhaps by electrocution?" "This is most interesting." Hammond's face darkened. "I know my job, sir. That wire was fixed proper. No exposed ends, no faults. If something went wrong, it wasn't my doing." Poirot raised a hand, placating. "Of course, monsieur. I seek only to understand. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual about Monsieur Reed or his booth that day?" Hammond shrugged. He was the same as always, quiet, kept to himself. His booth was cluttered, papers and such, but nothing out of the ordinary for an operator. Poirot stepped back, his gaze sweeping the trio once more. "Merci. You have given me much to consider. Inspector, may we examine the booth again?" The scene, it speaks when one listens closely. Jap led Poirot back to the glass-walled cubicle, now cordoned off by a constable. The body of Thomas Reed had been removed, but the booth remained untouched, its contents frozen in time. Poirot circled the desk, his eyes sharp as he examined the telegraph key, the coiled wires, and the slip of paper bearing the cryptic message. He knelt, peering at the floor where a faint scuff mark marred the linoleum near the chair. "Curieux," he murmured, tracing the mark with a gloved finger. "A shoe, perhaps, or something dragged." He rose, turning his attention to the desk. A few scattered papers bore routine telegrams, but one caught his eye, a draft message half-written in Reed's neat hand. "Urgent. Contact Shadow." Poirot slipped it into his pocket, careful not to alert Jap just yet. The telegraph machine itself was an older model, its brass components polished but worn. Poirot tapped the key lightly, listening to the faint click. The machine, it was in use when he died. Yet the log shows no transmission. Why? Jap scratched his head. Could he have been tapping out that message, "Shadow falls at midnight," just for himself? Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Non, mon ami. A man does not lock himself in a booth to write poetry. This message was meant for someone, or to deceive someone." He stepped back, surveying the booth's glass walls. The lock, a sturdy Yale model, showed no signs of tampering. The windows, high and narrow, were bolted shut, their frames caked with dust. Poirot's gaze lingered on the electrical conduit running along the wall, a thin pipe that carried wiring to the booth's light and telegraph system. He traced it with his eyes, noting where it disappeared into the desk. "The burn on Reed's hand," he said softly. "It suggests a current. Yet the technician insists the wiring was sound. We must verify this." Jap nodded, summoning a constable to fetch the office's maintenance records. As they waited, Poirot paced the corridor, his mind sifting through the suspect's words. Crane's nervousness, Voss's guarded calm, Hammond's defensiveness. Each held a clue, a thread in the tapestry of motive and opportunity. "The little gray cells," he murmured. "They are never idle." The constable returned with a ledger which Jap opened to the day's entries. Hammond's repair was logged at 4 o'clock. Loose wire, booth 7, repaired and tested. Poirot's brow furrowed. Tested, yet a man dies hours later. This is not a coincidence. He turned to Jap. I wish to speak with the night supervisor, the one who found Reed. And then, mon ami, we must learn more of our victim. A man who writes Shadow Falls at midnight is not an ordinary clerk. The night supervisor, a stooped man named Mr. Willis, was summoned. His hands trembled slightly as he recounted the evening. I was doing my rounds at 8:30, he said, his voice thin. Reed's booth was quiet, curtain drawn. I knocked, got no answer. Looked through the glass and saw him slumped over. I called for help and we broke the door open. He was already gone. Poirot's eyes sharpened. The curtain was drawn? You are certain? Willis nodded. Always was with Reed. Liked his privacy. And you saw no one else near the booth? No, sir. Just Crane at his station, Miss Voss in the translation room, and Hammond downstairs earlier. Poirot thanked him, dismissing him with a nod. He turned to Jap, his expression grave. This privacy, it is significant. Reed hid something, perhaps from his colleagues, perhaps from others. We must search his lodgings, Inspector. A man's home. It reveals his secrets. As they prepared to leave, Poirot paused, his gaze returning to the booth. The message, the burn, the locked door. It was a puzzle, intricate and deliberate. He thought of the suspects, Crane with his furtive glances, Voss with her cool detachment, Hammond with his insistence on a job well done. One of them, or perhaps more, held the key to this mystery. But which? Back at his flat, Poirot sat by the fire, the slip of paper with urgent contact shadow before him. He sipped his tisane, the steam curling like the fog outside. Hastings, he called, knowing his friend was listening from the next room. We have a case of shadows and signals. Tomorrow we visit Reed's home. The truth, it lies in wait. He leaned back, his eyes half closed, but his mind was far from rest. The telegraph office, with its humming machines and hidden currents, was a stage, and Thomas Reed's death was no accident. The message, the lock, the burn. They were pieces of a pattern, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until he had arranged them all. Chapter 3. The Cryptic Message. The morning sun struggled through the fog, casting a pallid glow over London as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings stepped from a taxi onto the bustling pavement of Chancery Lane. Poirot, immaculate in his overcoat and Homburg hat, adjusted his gloves with a precise flick, his eyes scanning the street with the alertness of a hawk. Hastings, ever the loyal companion, carried a notebook, his face a mixture of curiosity and mild bewilderment. The events of the previous evening at the Central Telegraph office lingered in their minds, the image of Thomas Reed's lifeless form and the cryptic message, "Shadow falls at midnight," etched sharply in Poirot's memory. "Poirot, old chap," Hastings ventured as they approached the office. "That message, it's dashed odd, don't you think? Sounds like something out of a penny dreadful. What do you make of it?" Poirot's mustache curved slightly, a sign of amusement tempered by focus. "Mon cher Hastings, you are not wrong. The phrase, it is theatrical, no? But in its drama lies its purpose. It is not a random scribble, but a signal, a clue, perhaps a warning. To whom and for what we must discover. Come, we return to the scene to listen to its whispers." The Central Telegraph office was quieter in the morning, the frenetic clatter of telegraph keys subdued as clerks moved with purposeful efficiency. Inspector Japp awaited them near the locked booth, now cordoned off with a velvet rope, its glass walls reflecting the pale light. Japp's expression was one of weary determination, his hands thrust deep into his coat pockets. Morning, Poirot. Coroner's report came in. Reed died of electrocution, no question. High voltage, straight to the heart. That burn on his hand was from the telegraph key itself. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The key? It was the instrument of death? This confirms my suspicion. The booth was no accident, Inspector. Someone arranged this with precision, Japp nodded. We've checked the wiring again. Hammond swears it was fine when he left, but we're having an electrician look it over. Meanwhile, that message, shadow falls at midnight. No record of it being sent or received. It's as if Reed typed it for himself. Poirot tapped his cane on the floor, his mind racing. Or for someone watching. Let us examine this booth once more, mon ami. The scene, it holds secrets yet. The booth, though emptied of Reed's body, retained an air of grim stillness. Poirot circled the desk, his gaze darting from the telegraph machine to the wires snaking along the wall. He knelt, inspecting the conduit pipe, noting a faint scratch near its base, barely visible. "Regarde, Hastings," he said, pointing. A mark, fresh, perhaps from a tool. Someone tampered here. I think Hastings peered over his shoulder. Good Lord, Poirot, you think someone rigged the wiring? But how could they, with the booth locked? Poirot rose, dusting his gloves. The locked room, it is not impregnable. The lock, the windows, the wires, they are but pieces of a puzzle. We must now learn who Thomas Reed was, for a man does not die thus without a life that invites such an end. Japp arranged for them to visit Reed's lodgings, a modest boarding house in Clerkenwell, a short drive away. The landlady, Mrs. Grover, a stout woman with a perpetually pinched expression, met them at the door. Mr. Reed was a quiet tenant, she said, leading them up a creaking staircase. Paid on time, kept to himself. Never had visitors, not that I saw. Reed's room was Spartan, its furnishings limited to a narrow bed, a wardrobe, and a small desk cluttered with papers. A faint smell of tobacco lingered, though no ashtray was in sight. Poirot's eyes swept the space, noting the absence of personal touches. No photographs, no letters, only the tools of his trade. A telegraph code book, a fountain pen, and a stack of telegraph forms. Hastings, rifling through the desk, paused. Poirot, look at this. He held up a small notebook, its leather cover worn but intact. Inside were pages filled with numbers and letters arranged in seemingly random sequences. Poirot's fingers traced the entries, his brow furrowing. A cipher, Hastings. This is no mere doodle. Reed was engaged in something clandestine. Japp, peering over Poirot's shoulder, frowned. A code. You think he was mixed up in something shady? Perhaps, Poirot replied, slipping the notebook into his pocket. Or perhaps he was a guardian of secrets, or their victim. We must decipher this, but first let us search further. The wardrobe yielded little. A few suits, neatly pressed, and a pair of polished shoes. But beneath the bed, tucked against the wall, Poirot found a small tin box, its lock scratched as if pried open. Inside was a single item, a folded telegram dated a week prior, addressed to Reed. Its text was brief. Watch the shadow, trust no one. The signature was a single initial. K. Poirot held the telegram to the light, his eyes narrowing. This K, they knew something of Reed's activities. And this mention of shadow, it echoes our message. The plot, it thickens. Hastings, ever practical, scratched his head. But who's K, and why warn Reed about a shadow? Sounds like espionage to me, Poirot. Could he have been a spy? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Espionage, betrayal, or merely misunderstanding, all are possible. But we must not leap, Hastings. The little gray cells, they require order, method. We return to the office to question our suspects further. Their words, they will reveal more than they intend. Back at the Telegraph office, Poirot requested a private room to re-interview the suspects, this time with the notebook and telegram in mind. Arthur Crane was summoned first, his nervous demeanor unchanged. He sat, twisting his hands, his eyes avoiding Poirot's piercing gaze. "Monsieur Crane," Poirot began, his voice soft but commanding. "You spoke of Monsieur Reed's secrecy. Did you ever see him with a notebook, perhaps writing numbers or letters?" Crane's fingers froze. "A notebook? No, sir, never. He was always scribbling, but I thought it was work. Codes for telegrams, you know." Poirot leaned forward. "And this argument with Mademoiselle Voss, it was truly about scheduling? Or was there more?" "Speak plainly." Monsieur Crane's face reddened. "It was heated. I heard Reed say something about interfering and keeping out of it." Miss Voss looked angry, but she walked away. "That's all I know." Poirot dismissed him, noting the tremor in his voice. Next came Elena Voss, her composure as cool as the morning fog. She sat gracefully, her gray eyes meeting Poirot's with a hint of defiance. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, producing the telegram, "this was found in Reed's room. Watch the shadow, trust no one. Does this mean anything to you?" Her expression remained impassive, though her fingers tightened slightly on her handbag. "No, monsieur. I deal in words, not riddles. If Reed received such a message, it was not through my translations. And your argument with him?" Poirot pressed. "Monsieur Crane suggests it was more than a trifle, perhaps about his secretive habits." Her lips thinned. "I told you it was scheduling. Thomas was intense, yes, but I had no cause to pry into his affairs." Poirot nodded, letting her go but storing her words in his mind's meticulous filing system. Finally, George Hammond entered, his broad frame filling the doorway. His scowl suggested irritation, but Poirot sensed a wariness beneath it. "Monsieur Hammond," Poirot said, "you repaired a wire near Reed's booth. Did you notice anything unusual, papers perhaps, or a notebook?" Hammond shook his head. "Nothing like that. Just the usual mess, forms, pencils. I fixed the wire, tested it, and left. If there was a fault later, it wasn't my work." Poirot held up the notebook, watching Hammond's reaction. This was Reed's. It contained ciphers. Did he ever speak of codes or secrets? Hammond's eyes flicked to the notebook, then away. "Never. He was just an operator to me. Kept his business private." As Hammond left, Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. "They all deny, Hastings, yet they all conceal. Crane is nervous, Voss is guarded, Hammond is defensive. The notebook, the telegram, they point to a hidden life. We must consult an expert in ciphers." That afternoon, Poirot arranged a meeting with Major Lyle, a retired intelligence officer known to him from a previous case. Lyle, a gaunt man with a sharp mind, met them in a quiet tea room near Whitehall. Poirot presented the notebook, explaining the case in brief. Lyle examined the pages, his brow creasing. This is a substitution cipher, complex but not unbreakable. It'll take time, but I can crack it. As for shadow falls at midnight, it's a phrase I've heard before. During the war, a Baltic spy ring used shadow as a code word for their operations. If Reed was involved, he was playing a dangerous game. Poirot's eyes sparkled. Dangerous, oui. And someone ended it. Merci, Major. Your expertise, it is invaluable. As they left the tea room, Hastings turned to Poirot. A spy ring, Poirot? This is getting deep. Do you think Voss is involved? That accent of hers. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, Hastings. The accent, it suggests a past, but not necessarily guilt. We return to the notebook, the telegram, the booth. The truth, it is there, waiting for Hercule Poirot to unveil it. Back at his flat, Poirot spread the notebook and telegram on his desk, his mind a whirl of connections. The fog outside seemed to mirror the mystery, dense, elusive, but not impenetrable. He sipped his tisane, the steam rising like a cipher of its own, and murmured, "The shadow falls, but Poirot, he sees through the dark." Chapter 4. The Shadow of War. The morning light filtered weakly through the curtains of Hercule Poirot's flat, casting a soft glow on the polished mahogany table where he sat, his tisane cooling untouched. The notebook from Thomas Reed's lodgings lay open before him, its pages of cryptic numbers and letters a silent challenge to his methodical mind. Captain Hastings, seated opposite, leafed through a newspaper, his brow furrowed as he tried to keep pace with Poirot's relentless deductions. The events at the Central Telegraph office, the locked booth, the electrocuted operator, the enigmatic message, "Shadow falls at midnight," had woven a web of intrigue that Poirot was determined to unravel. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice crisp as he tapped the notebook, "this cipher, it is the key." Reed was no mere telegraph operator. He was entangled in something larger, something that cost him his life. We must understand the world in which he moved. Hastings set down the paper, his eyes bright with curiosity. "You think he was a spy, Poirot?" That telegram, "Watch the shadow, trust no one." It's the sort of thing you'd read in a John Buchan novel. Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "Perhaps, mon ami, but life, it is not a novel. It is more complex, more human. We must speak with someone who knows the shadows of which this telegram speaks. Major Lyle. He has hinted at espionage. We shall visit him again, but first, let us consider our suspects." He rose, pacing the room with his characteristic precision, his cane clicking softly on the polished floor. Arthur Crane, nervous and evasive, saw Reed argue with Mademoiselle Voss. Elena Voss, cool and composed, denies the argument's significance. George Hammond, the technician, insists his repairs were flawless. Yet a man is dead by electrocution, and a message speaks of shadows. There is a pattern here, Hastings, but it is incomplete. Hastings nodded, though his expression betrayed his struggle to follow. "What's our next move, then?" "Back to the telegraph office." "Non," Poirot replied, pausing by the window to gaze at the fog-shrouded street. "We go to Major Lyle. If Reed was involved in espionage, Lyle's knowledge of wartime intelligence will illuminate the path." The taxi ride to Lyle's modest house in St. John's Wood was silent, save for the occasional rattle of the vehicle over cobblestones. Poirot's mind was elsewhere, sifting through the fragments of the case. The burn on Reed's hand, the scratch on the conduit pipe, the ciphered notebook, the telegram signed K, each was a piece of a mosaic, and he was determined to see the whole picture. Major Lyle greeted them at his doorstep, his gaunt frame stooped but his eyes sharp with the alertness of a man who had spent years watching for hidden threats. The sitting room was cluttered with books and maps, a faint smell of pipe tobacco lingering in the air. Lyle motioned them to sit, his expression wary as Poirot produced the notebook and the telegram. "Major Lyle," Poirot began, his tone courteous but direct, "you spoke of a Baltic spy ring and the code word shadow. This telegram found in Reed's lodgings warns of a shadow and urges distrust. The notebook, it is a cipher. Tell me, what was Thomas Reed to the world of secrets?" Lyle's fingers tightened on his pipe, his gaze flickering to the papers. "Reed was no ordinary operator," he said after a pause. "During the war, the Central Telegraph Office handled sensitive communications, diplomatic cables, military dispatches. Even now, in 1925, with Europe uneasy, certain messages passed through that office under strict secrecy. Reed had been flagged by my old colleagues at military intelligence. He was suspected of intercepting messages beyond his clearance." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Intercepted by whom? And for what purpose?" Lyle leaned back, his voice low. "Possibly foreign agents. The Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, are a hotbed of intrigue. Nationalist groups, Soviet operatives, even German interests, all vie for influence. The phrase, shadow falls, was used by a Latvian network during the war, a signal for covert operations. If Reed was tapping into those channels, he was either a patriot uncovering a plot or a traitor selling secrets." Poirot's fingers drummed lightly on the arm of his chair. "And this K who warned him? An ally or a manipulator?" Lyle shrugged. "Could be either. Intelligence work is a hall of mirrors. Friends and foes look much the same. But I'd wager K was someone close to Reed, someone in the know. You'd do well to check his colleagues, especially that linguist Voss. Her background's murky, Latvian, I hear. She'd have access to the same cables Reed did." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloging the information. "Merci, Major. Your insight, it is most valuable. One final question. The cipher in this notebook. Can you confirm it is of the type used by this shadow network?" Lyle examined the notebook again, his eyes scanning the rows of numbers and letters. "It's consistent with their methods. A Polybius square likely, with a keyword. I'm working on it, but it's slow going. Give me a day or two and I'll have something." As they left Lyle's house, the fog had thickened, wrapping the streets in a ghostly veil. Hastings, pulling his coat tighter, glanced at Poirot. "A spy ring, Poirot. This is getting serious. Do you think Voss is our woman? She's got the accent, the access." Poirot raised a hand, his expression thoughtful. "The accent, it is suggestive, but not conclusive. We must not assume, Hastings. The little gray cells, they require evidence. Let us return to the Telegraph office and observe our suspects in their natural habitat. The truth, it reveals itself in the unguarded moment." At the Central Telegraph office, the morning shift was in full swing, the air filled with the rhythmic tap of telegraph keys. Poirot and Hastings positioned themselves discreetly in a corner, watching the suspects at work. Arthur Crane sat hunched at his station, his fingers trembling slightly as he tapped out messages, his eyes darting nervously toward the locked booth. Elena Voss in the translation room moved with calm efficiency, her pen gliding over papers as she deciphered foreign cables. George Hammond was absent, likely in the basement tending to the machinery. Poirot's gaze lingered on Crane. "Observe, Hastings. His hands, they shake. He is afraid, but of what? Guilt or merely the weight of suspicion?" Hastings frowned. He did mention that argument between Reed and Voss. Maybe he knows more than he's letting on. "Perhaps," Poirot murmured. "Let us test him." Approaching Crane's booth, Poirot adopted a disarming smile. "Monsieur Crane, a moment if you please. You work with such diligence, yet you seem troubled. Tell me, did Monsieur Reed ever speak of a K or mention a shadow?" Crane's face paled, his fingers fumbling a telegraph key. "No, sir. Never." He didn't talk much, like I said. Kept his business private. Poirot leaned closer, his voice soft but piercing. "And yet you saw him argue with Mademoiselle Voss. Did he mention anything? Perhaps a warning, a name?" Crane swallowed hard, his eyes flicking to the translation room. I heard him say something about watching his back. Said someone was too curious, that's all." Poirot nodded, dismissing him gently. "Merci, monsieur, you have been most helpful." As Crane returned to his work, Poirot turned to Hastings. "He conceals something, but it is fear, not guilt, I think. Let us speak with Mademoiselle Voss." They found Elena Voss in the translation room, surrounded by stacks of telegrams. Her gray eyes met Poirot's with a cool steadiness, but he noted a faint tension in her posture. "Mademoiselle," he began, "we have learned that Monsieur Reed was involved in matters of espionage. The word shadow, it appears in his papers. Does this stir any memory?" Her expression remained impassive, though her hand paused briefly on a telegram. "I deal in many words, Monsieur Poirot. Shadow is not one I recall. As for Thomas, he was a colleague, nothing more. I knew nothing of his private affairs." Poirot produced the telegram signed K. "This was found in his room. A warning, perhaps. Do you know anyone with this initial?" Her eyes flicked to the paper, then back to Poirot. "No. I have no K among my acquaintances. If Thomas was warned, it was not through me." Poirot smiled faintly, sensing her guardedness. "Of course, mademoiselle. But the truth, it has a way of surfacing." As they left the translation room, Hastings whispered, "She's hiding something, Poirot. Did you see how she hesitated?" "Oui, Hastings," Poirot replied. "But what?" "We must be patient. The cipher, it will tell us more." That evening, back at his flat, Poirot spread the notebook and telegram on his desk, his mind a whirl of connections. He had sent a copy of the cipher to Major Lyle, but his thoughts returned to the suspects. Crane's fear, Voss's composure, Hammond's absence, each was a thread in a tapestry of deception. The war's shadow loomed large, its echoes resonating in the telegraph office's humming wires. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low. "This case, it is not merely about a murder. It is about trust betrayed, secrets stolen. Reed was a player in a dangerous game, and someone ensured he played no more. Tomorrow we follow the trail of the shadow." He sipped his tisane, the steam curling like a ciphered message, and his eyes gleamed with the certainty that the truth, however elusive, would soon be within his grasp. Chapter 5. The Colleague's Secret. The drizzle that greeted Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings as they stepped from their taxi onto the slick pavement of a London side street was as persistent as the mystery itself. The fog of the previous days had lifted slightly, but a damp chill clung to the air. mirroring the unease that had settled over the investigation. Poirot, his overcoat buttoned tightly and his Homburg hat tilted just so, moved with his usual brisk precision, his cane tapping a steady rhythm. Hastings, clutching his umbrella, glanced at Poirot, sensing the detective's mind was already several steps ahead. "Poirot," Hastings ventured, "you've been awfully quiet since we left Major Lyle. Do you really think Crane's hiding something more than he let on?" He seemed rattled enough yesterday. Poirot's eyes gleamed beneath the brim of his hat. "Mon cher Hastings, Monsieur Crane is a man consumed by fear, and fear it betrays secrets." His words about Reed's argument with Mademoiselle Voss, they were too carefully chosen. He knows more, and today we shall uncover what he conceals. But first we observed their destination was a dingy pub near Farringdon, a place Major Lyle had mentioned as a haunt for telegraph office workers. Poirot had decided to shadow Arthur Crane, suspecting the nervous operator might reveal more in an unguarded moment than under formal questioning. The pub, the Rusty Anchor, was a narrow establishment wedged between a butcher's shop and a pawn shop, its windows fogged with condensation and its sign creaking in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer and tobacco smoke. Poirot, ever fastidious, wrinkled his nose but pressed forward, guiding Hastings to a shadowed corner booth where they could watch without being noticed. He had donned a plain tweed cap and a less ostentatious coat, a rare concession to disguise that made Hastings suppress a grin. "You look almost ordinary, Poirot," he whispered. Poirot's mustache twitched with mock indignation. "Ordinary, Hastings? No, I am merely adaptable." Now observe, they had not long to wait. Arthur Crane entered, his thin frame hunched against the drizzle, his eyes darting nervously as he scanned the room. He wore a threadbare overcoat, and his hands, still faintly stained with ink, clutched a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. He made his way to a table near the bar where a man waited, a burly figure in a flat cap, his face ruddy and his manner brusque. Poirot leaned forward, his ears straining to catch their words over the pub's low hum. "Can't keep covering for him," Crane was saying, his voice low but urgent. "It's too much, I tell you." The other man leaned closer, his tone gruff. "You owe me, Crane. Don't back out now. If they find out—" Crane's head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. "They won't." "I've done what you asked." Here he slid the parcel across the table, his hands trembling. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Interesting, Hastings. A transaction, perhaps? But for what?" Before Hastings could respond, Crane rose abruptly, casting a nervous glance around before hurrying out into the rain. The burly man pocketed the parcel and lingered, sipping his pint with a scowl. Poirot waited until Crane was out of sight, then rose, signaling Hastings to follow. "Come, mon ami. We must confront Monsieur Crane before he burrows deeper into his secrets." They caught up with Crane 2 streets away, his figure hunched against the drizzle as he hurried toward a tram stop. Poirot stepped in front of him, his cane blocking the path with a gentle tap. "Monsieur Crane," he said, his voice soft but commanding. "A word, if you please." Crane froze, his face paling to the color of the fog. Monsieur Poirot, I didn't see you." "No, you did not," Poirot said, his eyes piercing. "But I saw you at the Rusty Anchor with a man to whom you gave a parcel. You spoke of covering for someone, of fear that they might find out. Explain yourself, monsieur, for the truth it is slipping from your grasp." Crane's knees buckled, and he leaned against a lamppost, his breath coming in short gasps. "It's not what you think. I'm no murderer, I swear." Poirot's expression remained impassive. "Then what, monsieur? Who is this man, and what hold does he have over you?" Crane's eyes darted wildly as if seeking escape, but Poirot's steady gaze pinned him in place. Finally he crumpled, his voice barely above a whisper. "His name's Doyle. He's a bookie. I owe him money, gambling debts. I've been in deep for months. Reed, he knew about it." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "Monsieur Reed knew? And how did this come to pass?" Crane swallowed hard, his hands twisting together. "I was desperate, see? Reed caught me slipping a few shillings from the office petty cash to pay Doyle. He didn't report me, but he used it. Said he'd keep quiet if I helped him get extra shifts. He wanted time alone in the office late at night. Said he was monitoring something. I didn't ask questions. I couldn't afford to." Hastings, standing behind Poirot, let out a low whistle. "Good Lord, Crane, you were blackmailed." Crane nodded miserably. "I didn't mean any harm. I just arranged the schedules, made sure Reed got the late shifts. I never thought he'd end up dead." Poirot's fingers tapped his cane, his mind racing. "And this monitoring, Monsieur Crane, what did Reed do during these late hours?" "I don't know," Crane's voice cracked. "He'd lock his booth, draw the curtain. Sometimes I heard him tapping, but it wasn't regular messages. It was different, like he was testing something. I stayed out of it." Poirot studied him, noting the sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. "And the parcel you gave to Doyle?" "Money," Crane admitted, his shoulders sagging. "All I could scrape together. He's been hounding me since Reed died, saying I'd better pay up or he'd tell the police I was stealing." Poirot's gaze softened, though his voice remained firm. "You have been foolish, monsieur, but perhaps not guilty of murder. Tell me, did you see anyone near Reed's booth that night, anyone at all?" Crane shook his head. "No, sir. Just the usual, Miss Voss in the translation room, Hammond downstairs. I was at my station until the supervisor found him." Poirot nodded, stepping back. "Very well, Monsieur Crane. You will speak of this to no one, not even your friend Doyle. The truth, it is close, and Hercule Poirot will find it." As Crane hurried away, his figure swallowed by the drizzle, Hastings turned to Poirot. "Poor chap's in a mess, but do you believe him? About Reed blackmailing him?" "Oui, Hastings," Poirot replied, his eyes distant. "His fear, it is genuine. Reed used Crane's weakness to secure time alone, but for what? To intercept messages, perhaps, as Major Lyle suggested. We must return to the office and examine Reed's booth again. If he was monitoring, there may be traces yet." Back at the Central Telegraph office, the afternoon shift was in progress, the air humming with the steady click of telegraph keys. Poirot and Hastings, accompanied by a reluctant Inspector Japp, returned to the locked booth, now a silent monument to the tragedy. The glass walls gleamed under the electric lights, and the telegraph machine sat dormant, its brass key still bearing the faint scorch mark from Reed's fatal contact. Poirot knelt beside the desk, his gloved fingers tracing the wires that connected the telegraph key to the conduit pipe. He noted the scratch mark he had seen before, now more significant in light of Crane's confession. "Regardez, Hastings," he said, pointing to a small junction box beneath the desk. "This box It connects the telegraph to the main line. If Reed was intercepting messages, he may have modified it. Jap, peering over his shoulder, frowned. Modified how? The electrician said the wiring was standard. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Standard, perhaps, but adaptable. A clever man could tap into the line, divert signals without detection. We must have this box examined by an expert. He rose, his gaze sweeping the booth. A small pile of papers overlooked in the initial search caught his eye. He sifted through them, finding a crumpled note in Reed's handwriting. K. Check line 3 midnight. Poirot's pulse quickened. This K again, Hastings. They were working together, perhaps monitoring a specific line. But why midnight? Jap took the note, his brow furrowing. Line 3? That's one of the secure channels used for government cables. If Reed was tampering with it, then he was indeed a spy or a hunter of spies, Poirot finished. We must speak with Mademoiselle Voss and Monsieur Hammond again. Crane's secret, it opens a door, but the room beyond is still dark. As they left the booth, Poirot's mind churned. Crane's confession had revealed Reed's manipulation, but it also raised questions. Was Reed a patriot, intercepting messages to protect his country, or a traitor selling secrets? And who was Kay, the shadowy figure warning of danger? The drizzle outside seemed to echo the mystery, persistent, elusive, but not beyond the reach of Hercule Poirot's little gray cells. Chapter 6. The Linguist's Past. The late afternoon sky over London was a sullen gray, the drizzle having hardened into a steady rain that pattered against the windows of Hercule Poirot's taxi as it wove through the crowded streets toward Bloomsbury. Inside, Poirot sat in silence, his gloved hands resting on his cane, his green eyes half closed but alert, sifting through the mosaic of clues that had emerged in the case of Thomas Reed's death. Captain Hastings beside him fidgeted with his umbrella, his mind still grappling with Arthur Crane's confession and the cryptic note about K and line 3. The Central Telegraph office, with its locked booth and deadly telegraph key, seemed to pulse with secrets, and Poirot was determined to unravel the thread that led to Elena Voss, the enigmatic linguist whose composure hinted at depths yet unexplored. Hastings, Poirot said at last, his voice cutting through the hum of the taxi's engine. Mademoiselle Voss, she is a puzzle. Her words are measured, her manner calm, yet there is a shadow behind her eyes. The argument with Reed, the Baltic connection Major Lyle mentioned, these are not coincidences. We must learn her past, for it holds the key to her present. Hastings nodded, though his brow furrowed. She's a cool customer, I'll give her that. But a spy, Poirot? She doesn't strike me as the type. Too refined somehow. Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. Refinement, mon ami, is often the mask of cunning. We shall see what lies beneath their destination. Was a discreet inquiry agent, a former colleague of Major Lyle's, whom Poirot had engaged to delve into Elena Voss's background. The agent, a wiry man named Mr. Travers, operated from a small office above a bookshop, its shelves lined with dusty tomes and its air thick with the scent of old paper. Travers greeted them with a nod, his sharp eyes assessing Poirot as he gestured to a cluttered desk. Monsieur Poirot, Travers began, pulling a slim folder from a drawer. You asked about Elena Voss. I've done some digging, and it's not much, but it's intriguing. Born Elena Kovalenko, 1895, in Riga, then part of the Russian Empire, now Latvia. Father was a school teacher, mother a seamstress. She studied languages at university, fluent in Russian, German, French, and English. Left Riga in 1918 during the chaos of the war and the Bolshevik uprisings. Arrived in London in 1920, took work as a translator and landed at the Central Telegraph office 2 years ago. Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Kovalenko, you say? A name that begins with K. Most interesting. And her activities during those years between Riga and London? Travers shrugged, his expression guarded. That's where it gets murky. There are gaps, months unaccounted for, rumors she was involved with Latvian nationalists, maybe even ran messages for them during the war. Nothing solid, mind you, but her name popped up in a report from military intelligence, flagged as a person of interest in 1919. No evidence of wrongdoing, so they let it drop. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And her connections here in London? Family? Friends? None that I could find, Travers replied. She keeps to herself. Lodges in a boarding house in Bloomsbury, no visitors, no letters. The other tenants say she's polite but distant. One odd detail, though. A neighbor saw her burning papers in her fireplace last week. Could be nothing, just old bills, but... Poirot's gaze sharpened. Burning papers, you say? The act of one who wishes to erase a trail. Merci, Monsieur Travers. You have given me much to ponder as they left the office. The rain had eased, leaving the streets slick and reflective under the gas lamps. Hastings glanced at Poirot, his curiosity piqued. That K again, Poirot. Could she be the one who sent Reed that telegram? Watch the shadow. Trust no one. It fits, doesn't it? Perhaps, Poirot murmured, his mind racing. But we must not assume. The initial, it is suggestive, but not proof. We must visit Mademoiselle Voss's lodgings. The ashes of those papers, they may speak when questioned. Elena Voss's boarding house was a narrow, respectable building, its brick facade weathered but clean. The landlady, a brisk woman named Mrs. Carter, led them to Voss's room on the second floor, her keys jangling as she muttered about quiet tenants and no trouble. The room was modest but tidy, with a single bed, a small desk, and a wardrobe of dark wood. A faint scent of lavender lingered, a touch of elegance in the Spartan space. Poirot's eyes swept the room, noting the absence of personal mementos save for a single framed photograph on the desk. A young woman, presumably Voss, standing beside a man in a military uniform, the background a stark, snowy landscape. The inscription in faded ink read, Riga, 1918. Poirot lifted the frame, studying the man's face, stern with high cheekbones and a gaze that seemed to pierce the lens. Her brother, perhaps, Hastings suggested, peering over his shoulder. Or a comrade, Poirot replied softly. We shall ask her. He moved to the fireplace, where a small pile of ashes lay in the grate, the remnants of burned papers. Kneeling, he sifted through them with a gloved hand, extracting a partially intact fragment. The words were faint but legible. Meet at dusk. Line secure. Poirot's pulse quickened. This is no bill, Hastings. This is a communication, perhaps related to Reed's activities. He slipped the fragment into an envelope, then examined the desk. A few translation worksheets lay neatly stacked, but beneath them, tucked inside a blotter, was a small scrap of paper with a single word. Shadow. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The word again. It haunts this case like a specter. They returned to the Central Telegraph office, where Poirot requested a private interview with Elena Voss. She met them in the same small office as before. Her gray eyes cool but watchful, her posture as erect as a soldier's. Poirot wasted no time, producing the photograph and the burned fragment. "Mademoiselle Voss," he began, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "This photograph, it is from Riga, 1918. Who is the man beside you?" Her fingers tightened briefly on her handbag, but her expression remained steady. "My brother Janus. He was a soldier, killed in the war. A memory, nothing more." Poirot nodded, then held up the fragment. "And this found in your fireplace. Meet at dusk, line secure. You burned papers, mademoiselle, days after Thomas Reed's death. Why?" For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed her face, though she quickly masked it. "I burn old notes regularly, Monsieur Poirot. My work involves sensitive translations. It is protocol to destroy drafts." "And the word shadow?" Poirot pressed, showing her the scrap. "It appears in your room in Reed's papers in a message that led to his death. Explain this, if you please." Her lips thinned, and for a moment silence hung heavy. "I have no explanation," she said at last. "I deal in words, as I told you. Shadow is common enough. If Thomas used it, it was not my doing." Poirot leaned back, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are a linguist, mademoiselle, skilled in codes and meanings. Yet you claim ignorance of a word that binds you to a dead man. The truth, it is slippery, but it will not escape Hercule Poirot." She rose, her movements graceful but tense. "I have nothing more to say, monsieur. If you suspect me, bring proof." As she left, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice low. "She's tough, Poirot, but that fragment, line secure? It sounds like she was involved in whatever Reed was doing." "Oui, Hastings," Poirot replied, his fingers tapping his cane. "But as what? Ally? Adversary, or pawn? We must consult Major Lyle again. The photograph, the fragment, they point to a past in Riga, a past of secrets." That evening, Poirot telephoned Major Lyle, arranging to meet at his St. John's Wood home. Lyle, puffing on his pipe, examined the photograph and the burned fragment with a grim expression. "Riga, 1918, he mused. "That was a brutal time. War, revolution, spies on every corner. If her brother was in the Latvian resistance, she might have been drawn in. This fragment, line secure, it's the language of espionage. She could have been coordinating with Reed or watching him." "And the cipher?" Poirot asked, gesturing to the notebook Lyle was still decoding. "Slow progress," Lyle admitted, "but I'm close. The keyword might be shadow. I'll know by morning." As they left, the rain had returned, cloaking the city in a shimmering veil. Poirot's mind churned, piecing together the fragments. Voss's past, Reed's activities, the shadowy K. The linguist's composure was a facade, he was certain, but what lay behind it? Guilt, fear, or loyalty? The truth was close, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until it stood revealed in the light. Chapter 7. The Technician's Tools. The rain had relented by the time Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings stepped out into the damp streets of London. The late afternoon sky a sullen expanse of gray that seemed to press down upon the city. Poirot, his Homburg hat tilted just so and his overcoat buttoned against the lingering chill, moved with a purpose that belied the complexity of the puzzle before him. The death of Thomas Reed in the locked telegraph booth, the cryptic message, "Shadow falls at midnight," and the web of secrets surrounding Arthur Crane and Elena Voss had drawn Poirot's little gray cells into a frenzy of activity. Now his focus turned to the third suspect, George Hammond, the gruff technician whose tools and expertise made him a potential architect of the deadly trap. "Hastings," Poirot said as they boarded a taxi bound for the Central Telegraph office. "Monsieur Hammond is a man of practicality, of machines and wires. Yet his insistence that the booth's wiring was flawless. It troubles me. A man is dead by electrocution and the technician claims no fault. We must examine his domain, for the tools they do not lie." Hastings, ever the loyal companion, nodded, though his expression betrayed a flicker of doubt. "Hammond seems straightforward enough, Poirot. A bit rough around the edges, but he knows his job. Do you really think he could have rigged the booth?" Poirot's eyes gleamed beneath the brim of his hat. "Knowledge, mon ami, is a double-edged sword. A man who knows wires can mend them or misuse them. We shall see." The Central Telegraph office was quieter now, the evening shift thinning as clerks and operators prepared to end their day. The glass-walled booth where Reed had met his end stood silent, a cordon still in place, its telegraph key a mute witness to the tragedy. Poirot and Hastings were met by Inspector Japp, whose weary expression suggested another long day grappling with the case. "Poirot," Japp said, rubbing his hands together against the chill. The electrician's report came in. The wiring in the booth was tampered with, no question. Someone spliced a live wire into the telegraph key circuit. High voltage, enough to kill. Hammond's repair log checks out, but that doesn't mean he didn't go back later. Poirot's mustache twitched with interest. "A splice, you say?" "Précisément. This requires skill, intent. Where is Monsieur Hammond now?" "In the basement workshop," Japp replied. "He's been there all afternoon tinkering with the main lines. Says he's double-checking everything since the incident." "Then we shall visit this workshop," Poirot declared, his cane tapping a determined rhythm as they descended a narrow staircase to the bowels of the building. The basement was a labyrinth of pipes and cables, the air heavy with the smell of oil and metal. Dim electric bulbs cast long shadows, and the hum of machinery filled the space with a low, constant drone. George Hammond stood at a workbench cluttered with tools, screwdrivers, pliers, a soldering iron, and coils of wire. His broad shoulders were hunched as he tested a circuit with a voltmeter, his weathered face set in a scowl of concentration. "Monsieur Hammond," Poirot called, his voice cutting through the hum. "A moment, if you please." Hammond looked up, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Poirot and Hastings. "What now?" he growled, setting down the voltmeter. "I've told you everything." "The wiring was fine when I left it." Poirot stepped closer, his gaze sweeping the workbench. "So you say, monsieur." Yet the electrician confirms a live wire was spliced into the telegraph key. "This is no accident. You repaired the booth that day. Did you return later, perhaps to make adjustments?" Hammond's face reddened, his fists clenching. "I don't like what you're implying, sir. I've been at this job 20 years, never a mistake. If someone tampered with that booth, it wasn't me." Poirot's smile was disarming, but his eyes were sharp. "Of course, monsieur. I seek only the truth. Tell me, these tools—" He gestured to the workbench, noting the soldering iron, its tip faintly discolored. "Are they yours alone?" Hammond nodded curtly. Aye, my kit. No one else uses it. I keep it locked in here when I'm not working. Poirot picked up the soldering iron, turning it over in his gloved hands. This iron, it has been used recently, no. The tip, it is scorched as if applied to something unusual. Hammond's scowl deepened. I solder wires every day, that's my job, nothing unusual about it. Perhaps, Poirot murmured, setting the iron down. His eyes caught a blueprint tacked to the wall, a diagram of the telegraph office's electrical system. He stepped closer, noting handwritten annotations in pencil. Recent by the look of the crisp lines. This blueprint, Monsieur Hammond, it is yours? Hammond hesitated, then nodded. Aye, I use it to track repairs. Those notes are mine, updates from last week. Poirot traced a finger along the annotations which marked changes to the wiring near Booth 7 Reed's station. Curieux, he said softly. These changes, they are not standard. A rerouting of the circuit, perhaps to increase voltage? Hammond's jaw tightened. Just maintenance, sir. Nothing out of the ordinary, Poirot nodded, but his mind was alight with suspicion. Merci, monsieur. We shall speak again. As they left the workshop, Hastings whispered, That soldering iron, Poirot, do you think it was used to rig the booth? It is possible, Poirot replied, his voice low. The blueprint. It suggests knowledge of the system beyond routine repairs. Hammond is skilled, but is he innocent? We must test this back upstairs. Poirot requested access to the office's maintenance records, cross-referencing Hammond's logged repairs with the blueprint's annotations. The records confirmed his work on Booth 7, but the annotations suggested a modification not documented, a subtle alteration to the circuit's voltage. Poirot's pulse quickened. This is deliberate, Hastings. Someone with Hammond's skills could have turned the telegraph key into a weapon. Jap, joining them, frowned at the blueprint. If Hammond did this, why? He's got no motive we know of. Reed was just another operator to him. Motives, mon ami, are like shadows. They shift and hide, Poirot said. We must look deeper. Let us revisit Reed's booth. For the scene, it may yet yield more. The locked booth, now a familiar sight, stood silent under the harsh electric light. Poirot examined the junction box beneath the desk, where the electrician had found the spliced wire. He noted a faint residue of solder, barely visible, matching the scorch on Hammond's iron. Regardez, Hastings, he said, pointing. The handiwork of a technician, perhaps. But we need proof. He turned to Jap. Inspector, have this junction box analyzed for traces of solder. Compare it to Hammond's tools, and we must speak with him again, but not here. Let us invite him to my flat where he may feel less guarded. That evening, Hammond arrived at Poirot's Whitehaven Mansions flat, his broad frame filling the doorway. He looked uneasy, his calloused hands clasped tightly as he sat in the pristine sitting room, a stark contrast to his cluttered workshop. Poirot, pouring tisane with his usual ceremony, adopted a genial tone. Monsieur Hammond, he began, you are a man of skill, of precision. Yet a man died in a booth you repaired. The wiring was altered, a live wire spliced with care. Tell me, did you ever see Monsieur Reed with papers, perhaps a notebook, or hear him speak of a K or shadow? Hammond's eyes flicked to the side, but he shook his head. No, sir. Reed kept to himself. I fixed his booth, that's all. If someone messed with it after, it's not on me. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. And the blueprint with its annotations? They suggest a change to the circuit, one not logged. Why, monsieur? Hammond's face darkened. I told you just maintenance. You're barking up the wrong tree. Poirot nodded, dismissing him with a polite smile. As Hammond left, Hastings turned to Poirot. He's stubborn, Poirot. But that solder, the blueprint, it's suspicious, isn't it? Oui, Poirot replied, his fingers steepled. Hammond knows more than he says, but is he our killer? The solder is a clue, but not proof. We await Major Lyle's decryption of the notebook. The cipher, it will light the path. As the rain resumed outside, tapping against the windows, Poirot sipped his tisane, his mind a whirl of connections. The technician's tools, the linguist's past, the operator's fear. They were threads in a tapestry of deceit, and the shadow of war loomed ever larger. The truth was near, and Hercule Poirot would not let it slip through his fingers. Chapter 8. The Midnight Revelation. The clock in Hercule Poirot's Whitehaven mansion's flat struck 11, its chimes resonating through the quiet room where he sat, his tisane steaming gently on the table. The fire cast a warm glow, but Poirot's mind was far from restful, ablaze with the intricate threads of the case. Thomas Reed's electrocution in a locked telegraph booth, the cryptic message, "Shadow falls at midnight." The nervous operator Arthur Crane, the guarded linguist Elena Voss, and the defensive technician George Hammond. Each suspect held a piece of the puzzle, and tonight Poirot intended to assemble it. He had arranged a gathering at the Central Telegraph office at midnight, the hour named in Reed's final message, to confront the suspects and unveil the truth. Captain Hastings, adjusting his tie with a touch of unease, glanced at Poirot. I say, Poirot, this midnight business feels a bit theatrical, doesn't it? Gathering everyone in the office like this. What's your game? Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mustache curving slightly. Theatrical, mon ami? Perhaps. But the mind, it responds to the dramatic. At midnight, when the shadows fall, secrets are less guarded. We shall see who falters. Inspector Japp, who had agreed to the unconventional plan, met them at the telegraph office, his lantern jaw set with skepticism. The building was nearly deserted, the hum of telegraph keys silenced, the corridors lit only by flickering electric bulbs. The glass-walled booth, scene of Reed's death, stood like a sentinel at the end of the hall, its cordon removed for the occasion. Japp had summoned the three suspects, Crane, Voss, and Hammond, who arrived one by one, their faces betraying varying shades of apprehension. Arthur Crane entered first, his ink-stained fingers twitching as he glanced nervously at the booth. Elena Voss followed, her gray eyes cool but wary, her posture as composed as ever. George Hammond, last to arrive, crossed his arms, his scowl deepening as he surveyed the gathering. Japp stood by the door, his presence a quiet warning, while Hastings hovered near Poirot, notebook in hand. Poirot stepped forward, his cane tapping the linoleum floor, his voice clear and commanding. Monsieur, mademoiselle, we are here at the hour named in Thomas Reed's final message. Shadow falls at midnight. A man died in this booth, electrocuted by a telegraph key rigged with a deadly current. This was no accident, but a murder planned with care and executed with precision. Tonight, Hercule Poirot will reveal the truth. He paced before the booth, his eyes sweeping the suspects. Let us begin with the method. The telegraph key was connected to a live wire spliced into the circuit with skill. The junction box, he gestured to the small box beneath the desk, bore traces of solder matching the scorch on Monsieur Hammond's iron. The blueprint in his workshop, annotated with changes to the circuit, suggests knowledge of this deadly alteration. Hammond's face reddened, his fists clenching. I told you I fixed that booth proper. If someone tampered with it, it wasn't me. Poirot raised a hand, his gaze steady. Patience, monsieur. We shall return to you. Next, the motive. Monsieur Reed was no ordinary operator. His notebook, filled with ciphers and a telegram warning of a shadow, reveal he was entangled in espionage. Major Lyle, an expert, confirms the cipher matches methods used by a Latvian spy network active during the war. Reed was intercepting messages, perhaps to expose a traitor, or to become one. He turned to Crane, whose eyes darted to the floor. Monsieur Crane, you admitted Reed used your gambling debts to secure late shifts, allowing him time to monitor something. You feared exposure, but you did not kill him. Your fear, it is too genuine. Crane exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief, though his hands still trembled. Poirot's gaze shifted to Voss, whose composure remained intact, though her fingers tightened on her handbag. Mademoiselle Voss, Poirot continued, your past in Riga, your fluency in languages, your access to sensitive cables, these make you a figure of interest. The photograph of you with a soldier, your brother, you say, and the burned fragment in your fireplace. Meet at dusk. Line secure suggest you knew of Reed's activities. The word shadow in your room links you to his warning. Voss's eyes flashed, but her voice was steady. I have told you, monsieur, I know nothing of this shadow. My work is translation, not espionage. Poirot's smile was faint but piercing. And yet, mademoiselle, the evidence points to you. The blueprint with its annotations was not Monsieur Hammond's work, though he believed it so. The handwriting matches yours found on translation drafts in your room. You, with your knowledge of the telegraph system from years of handling cables, rewired the booth. You spliced the live wire using a soldering iron borrowed from Hammond's kit and staged the locked room to confuse us. A gasp escaped Hastings, and Japp's hand moved to his notebook. Voss's composure cracked, her face paling. You have no proof, she said, her voice low but trembling. Poirot held up the blueprint, its pencil marks stark under the light. These annotations, mademoiselle, they are yours. The solder residue in the junction box matches the iron you used. And the message, shadow falls at midnight. It was a signal to your network, a warning that Reed's interference had been stopped. You killed him because he threatened to expose your espionage. Voss stood rigid, her gray eyes locked on Poirot's. For a moment, silence gripped the room, broken only by the distant drip of a leak somewhere in the building. Then, her shoulders slumped, and she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You are clever, Monsieur Poirot. Too clever, Poirot's expression softened, though his tone remained firm. Why, mademoiselle? Why did you take such a path? She looked away, her gaze fixed on the booth. Thomas was intercepting messages meant for my people. Latvian patriots fighting for our homeland's freedom. He was selling them to foreign agents, endangering lives. Had no choice. I acted to protect my cause. Japp stepped forward, his voice gruff. That's enough, Miss Voss. You're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Reed. As a constable led her away, Poirot turned to Hastings, his eyes somber. A tragedy, mon ami. She believed her cause just, but murder, it is never the answer. Hammond, still standing by the door, shook his head. I didn't know, sir. My tools, She must have taken them when I wasn't looking. Poirot nodded. You were not at fault, monsieur. The cleverness of Mademoiselle Voss, it deceived us all. As the group dispersed, the clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the empty office. Poirot stood before the booth, his mind replaying the case's intricate dance of clues and motives. The shadow had fallen, but the truth now stood in the light. Chapter 9. The Confession. The central telegraph office, its corridors now shrouded in the stillness of midnight, seemed to hold its breath as Elena Voss was led away by Inspector Japp's constable, her tall figure diminished by the weight of her confession. The glass-walled booth where Thomas Reed had met his end stood silent behind Hercule Poirot, its telegraph key a mute testament to the tragedy that had unfolded. The air was heavy with the scent of wax and ink, tinged with the faint metallic tang of the machinery, as Poirot's keen eyes lingered on the scene. Captain Hastings, standing beside him, shifted uneasily, his face a mixture of shock and pity at Voss's revelation. "Good Lord, Poirot," Hastings whispered, his voice low in the echoing hall. She seemed so composed, so untouchable. To think she rigged that booth all to protect some spy network. Poirot's mustache twitched, his expression somber. Oui, mon ami, the heart, it can be a labyrinth of loyalty and desperation. Mademoiselle Voss believed she acted for a noble cause, but the path she chose led to murder. It is a tragedy not only for Monsieur Reed, but for her soul. Japp, returning from overseeing Voss's departure, mopped his brow with a handkerchief, his usual bluff demeanor subdued. That's one for the books, Poirot. A Latvian spy right under our noses. But how did you know it was her? Those annotations on the blueprint, how could you be sure they were hers? Poirot's gaze softened, though his voice retained its precision. The little gray cells, Inspector, they observe the details others overlook. The handwriting on the blueprint matched the translation drafts I examined in Mademoiselle Voss's room. Subtle but unmistakable in its loops and flourishes. The solder residue in the junction box, too, was fresh, consistent with the scorched tip of Monsieur Hammond's iron, which she used in secret. Her knowledge of the telegraph system, gained through years of translating cables, gave her the skill to rig the booth without detection. The message, "Shadow falls at midnight," was her signal to her network, a confirmation that Reed's threat was silenced. Hastings frowned, his mind still catching up. But why stage it as a locked room? Why not make it look like an accident elsewhere? Poirot turned to the booth, his cane tapping lightly on the linoleum. The locked room, Hastings, it was her brilliance and her error. By locking the booth from within using a simple trick, perhaps a string to pull the bolt after she left, she created the illusion of an impossible crime, diverting suspicion. Yet it drew attention to the booth's wiring, which led us to her. The clever criminal, they often overreached. Japp nodded, though his expression remained troubled. And this shadow business, her network, you say? We'll need to dig deeper. That notebook of Reed's, the cipher, any chance it'll lead us to her accomplices? Poirot produced the leather-bound notebook from his pocket, its pages still a mystery despite Major Lyle's ongoing efforts. This, Inspector, is the key to the wider web. Major Lyle is close to deciphering it, and I believe it will reveal the names or codes of those Mademoiselle Voss sought to protect or betray. You must ensure it reaches him securely. Japp took the notebook, his jaw set. Right. I'll have it sent to Lyle first thing. If there's a spy ring operating out of London, we'll root it out. As Japp moved to coordinate with his constables, Poirot stepped closer to the booth, his eyes tracing the glass walls, the desk, the telegraph key. The faint scorch mark on the wood where Reed's hand had rested seemed to pulse with the memory of the crime. He murmured, almost to himself, "A man died here believing he served one cause while another ended his life for hers." The shadow of war it casts long and bitter threads. Hastings, catching the words, placed a hand on Poirot's shoulder. "You sound almost sorry for her, Poirot." "She's a murderer, after all." Poirot's gaze was distant, his voice soft. "I do not condone Hastings, but I understand. Loyalty to a cause, it can blind even the most refined mind. Mademoiselle Voss, she saw no other path. Yet justice, it must prevail." The clock in the office struck 1, its chimes a solemn reminder of the hour's passage. Poirot turned from the booth, his cane tapping a slow rhythm as he led Hastings toward the exit. The rain had ceased, leaving the streets slick and reflective under the gas lamps. Japp joined them, his coat bundled against the chill. "There's still work to do," Japp said, his tone brisk but weary. "Voss's statement will need to be taken, and we'll have to search her lodgings again. If she's part of a network, there could be more evidence." Poirot nodded. "Indeed, Inspector. And Monsieur Crane, Monsieur Hammond. They must be questioned further to ensure no other threads remain untied. But for tonight, the truth has been laid bare." As they stepped into the night, the air was sharp, with the promise of frost. Hastings glanced at Poirot, his curiosity undimmed. "What now, old chap? Back to your flat for a tisane and a rest?" Poirot's smile was faint but resolute. "Soon, Hastings. But first I must reflect. The case, it is solved, yet the heart, it aches for those caught in such webs. Mademoiselle Voss, she chose a path of shadows, and now she walks in chains." They climbed into a waiting taxi, the city's lights blurring into streaks of gold against the dark. Poirot's mind, though satisfied with the resolution, lingered on the human cost, the ambitions, fears, and loyalties that had collided in a single deadly moment. The shadow had fallen, but its echoes would linger long after the night was done. Chapter 10. The Final Clue. The pale light of dawn crept through the curtains of Hercule Poirot's Whitehaven Mansion's flat, casting delicate shadows across the polished mahogany table where he sat, his tisane long since cooled. The events of the midnight confrontation at the Central Telegraph office lingered in his mind, the image of Elena Voss's pale, defeated face as she confessed to the murder of Thomas Reed, etched sharply in his memory. Captain Hastings, sprawled in an armchair with a newspaper forgotten on his lap, stirred as Poirot set down his cup with a soft clink, his green eyes alight with the quiet intensity of a man tying the final knot in a complex tapestry. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low but clear. "The case, it is solved, yet one thread remains. The notebook of Monsieur Reed with its cipher, it holds the names of those in Mademoiselle Voss's network. We must ensure it reaches Major Lyle, for the shadow of this affair extends beyond one death." Hastings rubbed his eyes, stifling a yawn. "By Jove, Poirot, you don't let up, do you?" Voss confessed. "The murder's pinned on her. Can't we call it a day?" Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "Non, mon ami. The murder, it is but the surface. Beneath lies a web of espionage, and the notebook, it is the map to its heart. Come, we shall visit Inspector Japp this morning and see this through." The yard was a hive of activity when they arrived, constables bustling through the corridors with files and telegrams. Jap, looking as though he hadn't slept since the midnight gathering, greeted them in his cramped office, a stack of papers teetering on his desk. "Poirot, Hastings," he said, gesturing to a pair of chairs. "Voss is in custody, giving us a statement. She's tight-lipped about her network, but she's admitted to rigging the booth. Says Reed was selling secrets to a foreign power, Germany, she thinks. Wanted to stop him before he did more damage." Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. "And the notebook, Inspector? It must go to Major Lyle at once. The cipher, it will reveal her accomplices." Jap produced the leather-bound notebook from a drawer, its worn cover a stark reminder of Reed's hidden life. "Already arranged. Lyle's expecting it this afternoon. He phoned earlier, says he's cracked the cipher. The keyword was shadow, just as you suspected. He's got a list of names coded, but he's working on matching them to real people. Could be a breakthrough for military intelligence." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Excellent, mon ami. And what of Monsieur Crane and Monsieur Hammond? Have they been questioned further?" Jap leaned back, his chair creaking. "Crane's a nervous wreck, but he's sticking to his story. Helped Reed get late shifts because of his debts, nothing more. Hammond's clean far as we can tell. His tools were used, but there's no evidence he knew. Voss must have slipped into his workshop when he wasn't looking." Poirot's gaze drifted to the window, where the morning sun struggled against a veil of clouds. The tools, the blueprint, the locked booth, all were her instruments. But the notebook, it is the final clue. We must see Major Lyle. They found Lyle at his St. John's Wood home, hunched over a cluttered desk strewn with papers and code books. The air smelled of pipe tobacco and ink, and the retired intelligence officer's gaunt face lit with a grim satisfaction as he greeted them. "Poirot, you've stirred up a hornet's nest," he said, tapping the notebook. "This cipher's a gold mine. It's a Polybius square, as I thought, with shadow as the keyword. It lists contacts, 5 names all coded, but I've traced 2 already. One's a clerk in the Foreign Office, another's a courier in Dover. Voss's network was small but dangerous." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "And the others?" Lyle shook his head. "Still working on them. But this confirms Voss was running messages for a Latvian nationalist group, funneling intelligence through the Telegraph office. Reed stumbled onto it, started intercepting their cables. Maybe to expose them, maybe to sell the information himself. Voss killed him to protect her people." Hastings, standing by the window, let out a low whistle. "A proper spy ring right here in London. And that telegram signed K, was it Voss, warning Reed to back off?" Lyle frowned, flipping through his notes. "Possibly. Her maiden name, Kovalenko, fits. But the telegram's tone, 'Watch the shadow, trust no one,' suggests someone else, someone warning Reed about Voss. Could be another member of the network or an outsider. I'm cross-referencing the cipher's names to find a match." Poirot's fingers tapped his cane, his mind racing. "This K. They are the shadow behind the shadow. If they warned Reed, they may still be active. Inspector, you must increase security at the Telegraph office. The network, it may not yet be broken." Jap nodded, scribbling a note. "I'll have men posted there round the clock. If there's another spy, we'll catch them." As they left Lyle's house, the clouds parted, briefly casting a fleeting ray of sunlight over the damp streets. Poirot paused, his gaze distant. The final clue, Hastings. It is not only the notebook, but the human heart. Voss acted for loyalty, Reed for ambition or betrayal, and Kay. Their motive remains hidden. Yet the truth, it is now in the hands of justice. Back at his flat, Poirot handed Japp the notebook with a solemn nod. Take this to Major Lyle, Inspector. The cipher, it will lead you to the rest of the shadow. The case of Thomas Reed, it is closed, but the ripples, they will spread. Japp tucked the notebook under his arm, his expression resolute. Thanks, Poirot. You've done it again. We'll mop up the rest. As Japp departed, Hastings sank into an armchair, his face a mixture of awe and exhaustion. Another case solved, old chap. But I must say it's a grim business. Spies, murder, all that intrigue. Makes one long for a quiet day at the races. Poirot's smile was wistful as he poured a fresh tisane, the steam curling like a final, fleeting cipher. The races, Hastings? Perhaps one day. But for now, the little gray cells, they rest knowing the truth has been found. The shadow falls no more. He sipped his tisane, the firelight dancing in his eyes, and the weight of the case settled into memory, a puzzle completed but never forgotten.